Hey guys, quick edit here. In production of this video, Blizzard went ahead and updated their information on the XP nerf and what it means to grouping. Now, I don't really think this really affects the video too much, but I will leave a link down below to the most current change. And it is a PTR build, so things are always evolving. I also wanted to make a quick apology. In my section about Legion, I refer to Stormheim as Stormsong, which is obviously the zone in Battle for Azeroth. I was up late researching information about the secret pet ball, and I just had Stormsong on my mind. Again, my apologies. I actually mean Stormheim. And a side note, my rant always comes from a place of love and respect for the game. I really hope you enjoy the video. Hello everyone, it's Shane here from D2 Games. You know, today I wanted to talk about something that you might have already heard. Last night in the PTR build of 8.2, Rise of the Ashara, they're introducing a new leveling nerf. Now, this leveling nerf is targeted at Twinks, and it actually can also affect you, the player, who has nothing to do with twinking or stopping the XP gains on your character. Twinks. I really hate that word, the word Twinks. I really wish that the community had a different name for it, but unfortunately that's what we're left with, I guess, because you're twinking with your level or whatever. Anyways, the point is that in the upcoming patch, there's going to be a new leveling nerf that is going to reduce players' XP gains by 95%. Now, before I go into the reasons why I actually don't think that this is a good idea for the community, I kind of want to give a brief history of twinking, where it came from, the history it has, you know, pertaining to WoW and Blizzard, and how Blizzard has approached the whole twinking culture since the beginning of Classic. So if you give me a few, let me go ahead and get into the history, and I'll go ahead and give you my opinion and why I think that there's probably something better to do with your time than to allocate resources and time to figuring out a way to stop people from having fun that I believe has no real impact on the game whatsoever. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now, for as long as I can remember, even in MMOs and RPGs, we have always tried to take toons or characters, whatever you want to call it, and give them gear that is the best, if you will, or take them to areas where they're not really supposed to be at and beat whatever enemy boss that we can fight at the lowest level that we can do it, right? I mean, you even see it now. You know, speedrunners trying to beat everything with the least amount of stuff possible. And this is kind of where it all started. You know, gamers always want to challenge themselves and find new ways that they can beat things and impose rules and restrictions on themselves just to make the game harder, just to say, hey, look, I can do this. And World of Warcraft is no different, really. I mean, even at the beginning of Classic, players would do everything they can to deck out low-level toons just so that they can beat high-level toons in duels. It was really special to see that, to stand outside of Stormwind and watch a, you know, level 29 rogue fight even people up to level 40. It was hilarious. It was fun. And it was always like this really unique niche that it was just a fun spectacle to watch. You know, it was something really to behold, to see that in front of Stormwind. Now, in Classic, when they introduced, you know, Battlegrounds, and players could queue up for these Battlegrounds, so could low levels. Now, the big difference back then was Battlegrounds back then didn't give you any XP. So what did this mean? Well, it meant that if you're doing a Battleground as a low level, you just did it out of pure fun. It was just something to do to pass time. You know, leveling was a lot slower back then, and sometimes you just needed a break in the monotony of that of finding quests and traveling over the world content. However, when doing low-level Battlegrounds, it was divided up into brackets, you see. And the brackets were pretty much into nines. So you would have your, 11 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, so on and so forth, right? And players, or primarily people who twinked, would try to get to the max level of their bracket. So if you wanted to stay in the 19 bracket, you would get to level 19. And that would obviously give you a level advantage. That would, give you power boost, damage boost, health boost, all your attributes will be raised. Now, you would incorporate that with buying and getting the best in slot gear. Now, there was something that was a little bit of a, I guess you can say, finesse behind it. You see, you gained XP, and if you went to level 20, you were outside your bracket. You got put into the new bracket. So you couldn't dominate your battleground that you wanted to go into. So players would level their characters up to 19 or 29, 39, whichever, and they would sit in Stormwind. And then they would get other tunes or even lower level tunes to find BOEs, to buy stuff off the auction house, and they would equip their character in Stormwind to try to get the best in slot possible gear that they could possibly have before entering these battlegrounds. And as you can imagine, that this takes a lot of time, skill, money, and a lot of knowledge of the game, because you need to make sure you're taking the right quest, picking the right starting classes, races, if you wanted to make sure you had the best possible gear before entering a battleground. And as you can imagine, players did just that. They were gods among men. They easily decimated the battlefield. You would have rogues and hunters just wiping out the entire battlefield. I mean, undead rogues were a nightmare. They would easily just defeat the entire team, no problem. And again, you didn't gain any XP for this, so you were already BGing just for the fun of it. Now, Blizzard's first attempt at trying to combat the influx in twinking was in patch 2.2, which was also considered the Brewfest patch. Blizzard's first attempt to combat this was by making it to where when you were entering matchmaking system, Blizzard would try to put you against other players of equal level and equal gear. So what this means is that if you were a level 19 rogue and you had blues, maybe some epics, it would try to put you against another level 19 with blues and epics. So try to balance the whole twinking culture. However, what ended up happening was something else that was actually way more funny, I think. What ended up happening is that it was like having two generals fight each other. It was like having two gods going at each other in the middle of the battleground, and we're like the NPCs behind them. I think the best way to explain it is if you ever play Heroes of the Storm, and you know how you pick your favorite characters, you pick Arthas, you pick Varian, you guys fight in the middle, and you have those little NPCs that are walking beside you and you kill them for experience points. That's kind of how it was when they introduced this whole trying to get players to have equal skill fight each other, because they couldn't always find a whole team of twinks. They couldn't always balance it perfectly, so you always had your imbalancing and whatnot. In patch 3.2, which is one of my favorites, obviously it's the Lich King patch, Call of the Crusade, Blizzard, they introduced a new ways to gain XP. They wanted to figure out what are some good ways for new players and existing players to gain XP by not just doing leveling in dungeons, but can we figure out new ways? And they did. They decided to start making battlegrounds award XP. Now, however, this meant entering a battleground as a twink would now grant you XP and taking you out of your bracket if you went past like your 19 or 29. So Blizzard, they brought in two new NPCs. Now you can find these NPCs in your major cities, and these NPCs would allow you to turn off XP gains. This allowed twinks to stay on their high level end, right, or at the end of their bracket, whichever bracket they desired, but it came at a caveat. You see, if you turned off your XP, you're now only going to be queued against other players who also turned off their XP. So you're fighting against other players with good gear, which kind of defeats the purpose of twinking to begin with. Now, sure, there is some niche people out there who actually enjoy you know, high skill, high end PvP at a low level, but not as many as you would actually think. Now, this was their next attempt at, obviously, of trying to stop twinking, especially in Battlegrounds. However, this came at a cost to everybody. So not just the Twinks, but we all paid the price for this change. You see, what ended up happening is that back then, we were actually in something called battle groups. And battle groups is essentially a collection of multiple servers put together. You queue up for a battleground, you would be queued up against those other servers. So queue times were a little bit longer. And when they decided to separate even more players, especially those who were twinking, this just further increased the queue time for not just the people twinking, but for people who weren't twinking to begin with. Now, it wouldn't be until patch 4.0 in Cataclysm when Blizzard decided to go ahead and merge all the battle groups together. Obviously, this was done to speed up times for not just people who were twinking, but also people who weren't tweaking. Obviously, this was a very welcome change. It's one of the very few things that was actually done right in Cataclysm. Cataclysm brought on a lot of things that players really just don't like about the game. It kind of is what started the downward spiral, I would say, for WoW. But if there's one thing to take out of 4.0, was that they decided to merge the battle groups and pretty much get rid of battle groups. That should have been done a long time ago. That was an amazing change, and I'm glad they did that. Now, in 5.2, Blizzard wanted to make it even easier for people to get involved into PvP at low levels. Now, when you enter the battleground, your character would be scaled up to the end level of that bracket. Therefore, a level 11 would be taken to a level 19. Further taking advantages away from Twinks and people just who were higher level than you. You see, when you brought your attributes up, when you brought your level up, there was no longer a level gap. You were 19, he was 19. If you were 30, you're now 39. Up until this patch, players were using heirloom gear as a way to twink still, but they were doing it in a very tedious way. You see, what they would do is that they would enchant and deck out their low levels heirloom gear. And then once their character surpassed a level bracket, they would then make a new tune and send gear down to them and rinse and repeat. As you can imagine, this change they brought in 5.2 with players leveling and scaling all the way up to the end of their bracket, this change made it not so worthwhile for them to continue doing this tactic. And there's no surprise that after 5.2, talks about Twinks and twink culture kind of died out. Besides serving a very small purpose. For example, one of the reasons why I keep a level 85 around is because there's two enchants that can only be done by a level 85 to 99, and that's your shoulder enchants and leg enchants to heirloom gear. And only a level 85 or all the way to 99 can actually apply them. Now, this is what I use these level tunes for. Now, there's other people out there who have more lucrative ways of figuring out what a low level tune can be used for. But ultimately, Twinks and the culture kind of faded away as there was really no reason to twink anymore, and you really couldn't have really good advantages, especially if you're going to be queued against other people who are twinking. It's just balance at that point. No, I don't mean balance as in like a warrior and a rogue at 19 best gear. Which one's better? I mean, you're going against other players who are essentially doing the exact same thing as you. And the whole point of twinking is being able to go in there and just decimate the field. And since you can no longer do that, well, that was kind of it for Twinks. That is until 7.0. You see, in 7.0, twinking had a huge resurgence. And it was actually kind of amazing. You see, it came back out of nowhere, but this time, it came back as through PvE. So twinking that was started in PvP now has found its way to PvE. And there's a good reasons for that. You see, in 7.0, They brought some changes that made twinking not just fun, but incredibly lucrative. And some of these changes, well, 3 primary changes I'll go into right now. You see, they introduced legendaries. Legendaries gave a lot of power, and some of them actually gave talents. And that was huge. You can actually get your legendaries at 101. Now, that was a big deal, because that means that as soon as you hit 100 or 101, you can pick up a legendary that would drastically change your gameplay from that moment. That's not to mention, your starting quest was to give you your artifact weapon, and the artifact weapon was incredibly powerful. You could actually start earning artifact power even before you were leveling. And finally, one of the biggest changes they did in 7.0 was they introduced level scaling. Now, level scaling was new, especially to World of Warcraft, because that meant a player could start in Stormsong at level 100 and end in High Mountain. Or, if they wanted to, they could stop halfway through Stormsong and just go straight to High Mountain if they wanted to. But what did this mean? Well, this meant that players of different levels would be running into each other, questing together, grouping together, doing content together, even PvPing against each other. So Blizzard had to figure out a way that they could have a 109 and a 101 queue up together and be able to kill mobs. Now, they had 2 options. They could either take the 109 and scale him down to the 101, but that wouldn't be fun, would it? Of course not. So what they decided to do was allow the 101 to do more damage to match the 109. Because for the 101 mob, for the 101 player, he sees a 101 mob. For the 109 player, that's what he sees, is also a 109 mob. And another thing they implemented was that the BOEs that dropped, they dropped at 101. Now, the reason why they did this is because they didn't know when you would acquire these BOEs, as each BOE is attached to a particular set of mobs that may drop in High Mountain, whereas a different set of BOEs may drop in Stormsong. So, to allow players to equip them at any level, they decided to make them all 101. However, the power level behind these BOEs were equivalent to the 5-man heroic dungeons, which gave them a huge power bonus, especially when you equip these to a 101. Not to mention, they had additional stats on it like Leech, which would heal the player or steal some health to heal the player while doing damage. So it didn't take long for players to go ahead and turn off their XP at 101, farm their legendaries, get their BOEs, and start twinking out their characters. Now, this came at a very steep cost. BOEs were incredibly expensive, especially the ones with the correct stats on them. If it had a socket, if it had leech, these pieces could go for thousands, even millions of gold. But players would purchase these items so that they could twink out their characters once more. Thus, the twinking culture was reborn. But this time a little bit different. You see, what they would do instead is that once they turned off their XP at 101, once they acquired their legendaries, their artifact, and their BOEs, they would then sit and sell runs. They would find players who won a level really fast, they would take them into a 5-player dungeon, and they would run them through that dungeon. Because remember, the zone scaled to your level. So the 101, being superly geared, would easily defeat every mob in that dungeon at a very fast pace. We're talking 5-6 minutes flat. They would clear these dungeons and they would level up multiple people incredibly fast. Now, of course, you had to pay for this. And sometimes it could be quite expensive at 10,000 gold or 20,000 gold per level. But it was a great way to make money, but a huge investment on the Twinker itself. I remember, especially on my server, that DKs were kind of like the #1 Twinkers, at least on my server it was. And DKs would get decked out and they would just run like 3 or 4 people through a dungeon so fast. They just level you up within an evening. You're hitting 110, no problem. And you had, but you know, for the most part, you had to pay a lot of money for this. It was a convenience thing, but it was really cool to see Twinks back in action, but this time on the PvE side. So Twinks went from destroying you and hurting you to helping you, which I thought was a really interesting twist to see that. I thought that was a great way to bring back the twinking culture into World of Warcraft. Now let's enter BFA 8.0. Twinks, for the most part, continued. You see, in BFA, we lost our artifacts. And once you hit 120, you're losing your legendaries. And see, Blizzard knew that players would feel weak because of this. So they decided to bake in some of the abilities into our class and talents to retain some of that power that we lost from 110. However, legendaries worked up until 115. So now players would stay at 110 or 111, whichever they wanted, and just power level you in Freehold or Island Expeditions, because the zone scaling to your level is still there from Legion. And as you can imagine, you could easily level up to 120 very fast doing Island Expeditions, having a Demon Hunter, which is currently the favorite for BFA, a decked out Demon Hunter. He could power level you through an Island Expeditions in about 5 minutes, even shorter for some people, and you could easily hit 120 in no time. But again, comes at a steep cost. We're talking 20, 30K per run. If you got the money, you can easily level up. Now, this isn't the first time in BFA where Blizzard tried to stop twinking. In fact, they actually tried or flirted the idea that they might actually do this. Back in December, they released a blue post, and in that blue post it said, since the launch of Battle for Azeroth, we've noticed an increasing trend of players turning off XP gains at 110 in order to repeatedly power level other players, characters at an excessive rate without increasing their own level. The intention of the XP off feature is to allow alternate characters to stay in lower level PvP brackets or relive lower level content, not to purposely halt progression and content relevant to the current expansion. To curb this behavior, we plan to implement a hotfix in the coming days that will disable the ability to turn off XP gains on the character's level 110 or higher. Additionally, any character of that level who already has the XP disabled will find automatically re-enabled the next time they log in. And now this was met with a lot of backlash. Okay, this was met with just tons of people not happy with this change at all. And Blizzard kind of backtracked this. So Blizzard decided to respond back and say they've been thinking about this plan more today and agree that there's probably better ways to approach this issue. We're going to hold off on this for the time being while we discuss. So what does this mean? Well, this means that they are obviously aware that there's enough people that this was going to upset that maybe they shouldn't do this. Maybe they shouldn't disable this at all. So they kind of backed off of it. And that was kind of the end of the BFA attempt to end twinking. That is, of course, until just recently on the new build of 8.2, Rise of the Ashara. You see, in the new build, they implemented a buff that actually reduces other players' experience gains in the party, introducing the new Experience Eliminated buff. So, what is this buff? Experience gained from quests and kills vastly reduced. Someone in your party has chosen to no longer gain experience. Yay. What a wonderful job. What better way to punish Twinks than to punish everybody else who literally hasn't done anything wrong at all? I mean, I can't think of a worse way to stop twinking than to implement a buff like this. This is not how you handle the situation. I mean, it's clear if you've been listening that Blizzard hasn't really wanted Twinks from the beginning of the game, and that's fine. Although I would argue that twink culture is kind of cool, and I really appreciate it that the culture kind of came around and helped the PvE content and helped us, you know, power level stuff. I see no problem with this. But what does this actually mean, right? So if they bring this buff out, what does this mean? Well, before we can ask that question, we need to understand how it works. So it's pretty simple. If someone turns on the ability to no longer gain XP, that player is like a stigma. He's like a virus, if you will. And anyone who parties with this player, okay, will ultimately get this buff. Because this is not just like a dungeon thing. Like if you go into a dungeon, he gives you this buff. No. This is what happens if you're just grouped with this person. And you know what's crazy about it? In the most recent build, now this could change. This is obviously a PTR build. But in the most recent build, it has a 200-yard radius. That's right. So if you even have this guy in your group, essentially if this guy's like in the zone with you, you're going to get a 95% reduction to your experience gained. That is devastating, to say the least. So now let's think about, what does this mean? How players are going to react to this? Well, there's two main ways players are going to react to this, right? Well, the first way they're going to react to this is the culture is just going to die, right? Twinking culture is going to die because as of right now, they don't really PvP. Like I said, sure, there's some people out there who enjoy high-level PvP at a low level, and those people will exist, but I'm telling you, that group is very small. And the other group of people that's going to use this buff are people who are going to exploit this buff. And what I mean by that is, if this only comes to you by just grouping with people, people are going to use this to their advantage. They're just going to join your group with this buff and stop your progress. Now, sure, you're saying, well, Shane, they can separate the queue just like they do in Battlegrounds. Can they? What happens if they're queued up and they don't have the buff yet? They haven't turned it on yet. And the queue pops for the dungeon. And then they quickly turn it on and join your dungeon. Then what? What makes this worse is that you don't know who has it, right? You don't know who has it. So even if you wanted to vote kick somebody, you wouldn't know who. And even if Blizzard decides to say, okay, we're going to show you who actually turned off the XP. Okay, we'll do that. What happens if it's a tank or healer? What are you going to do? Are you going to vote kick them out and go back to waiting in queue for 40, 50 minutes? I don't think so. It's not going to happen. This is why this change is kind of bad. Now, that's the only way I see this happening. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, what does Blizzard gain from this? Why would they make a change like this? Who stands to gain the biggest benefit from this, right? Obviously, Blizzard thinks they're going to gain something from this. And it's hard for me to think what reason this could be, because I think this is absolutely harmless to the game, right? Because a twink has to spend gold, time, resources, acquiring gear, acquiring the best possible setup that he can find, not to mention skill. Just because you get these pieces doesn't mean you're going to go into freehold and just tear everything up. No, you're going to have to actually be good at the game. You have to. You can't just walk in there with gear and think you're going to win. It's not going to happen. And then as far as the people who are paying for this type of service, well, they have to spend time getting that gold somehow. Now, whether that gold is farm time or whether that gold is they spend money, get the WoW token, and sell it in the game, either way, Blizzard's making money off these people. And these people wouldn't do this if they had a lot of fun leveling, right? Let's face it. The leveling experience is not the best, and I talked about that in the previous video. Links down below to where you can find that video. So what does Blizzard stand to gain from this? Well, the only thing that I can think of is the conspiracies that are being pushed around the forums at the moment in Reddit, which is people believe that Blizzard's going to introduce a new 120 token or max level token Or maybe they're going to introduce some type of XP potion. Now, my feelings on that is that I actually don't mind. I don't really care too much if they do or don't. It's not a big deal to me. Mainly because they want players to get to the end game as it is. So allowing players to skip to the end, I guess it's not a big deal. I wish that they had more engaging content. I wish that heirlooms rewarded more XP. I think players who want to buy heirlooms, they're the ones who really want to skip the content. And so when they nerfed heirlooms, this really made stuff like the whole twinking thing a better idea for people. It was, more worth it for them to farm gold and pay somebody else to power level them through, which totally makes sense. That's completely fine. So I don't really see a problem with this if they want to do it. If they want to implement this max level token or this XP potion, whatever you want to call it. However, I think that they're just losing money because there's plenty of people out there who would buy this stuff regardless if twinking was in there to begin with. Twinking is something that I think is just really special and unique to MMOs and RPGs in general and video games, period. And World of Warcraft has a really rich twinking history. People have to farm gold to use their service. And there's plenty of people out there who don't want to farm gold. They just want to spend money. And if Blizzard offered a service for them to just level up their toon, they would easily just purchase that. I don't think they're going to lose any business to the random player who decides to farm up, 200,000-300,000 gold to pay this twinker to get him through the content. I just don't see that disrupting anything that Blizzard has planned. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I think that this is a bad change. With players already having a hard time logging on the game to play it, to stay on, I think limiting more reasons for someone to potentially get on, it's just not a good idea. It's not good business. If someone wants to enjoy the game this way, let them do it. Let players log on. Someone's saying to themselves, you know what, I would play a druid. I want to be 120. I don't want to go through the content, but I got the gold. Or I'd rather go and farm on my main toon, and then I'll level up a different toon through twinking. And an expansion where people are already not logging on, because let's face it, BFA did not do good. We know this. Then let them do it. It has no harm. It affects nobody. I just think that this change is pointless. I think it's ridiculous to punish everybody else because someone else wants to twink. But that's just my opinion from an old dinosaur like myself. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. If you really liked the video, hit the subscribe button. There's a bell. Follow me on Twitter at D2Gamez. I also stream pretty regularly on Twitch, also at D2Gamez. I'll talk to you next time.